Has Joe started to read his own script and believe his own hype?
Making that weight for me, I think made him more sluggish.
It's no coincidence that anthonyjoshua has decided he's not going to fight again until December. This is Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. It's episode 21. Don't forget to keep liking the videos and subscribing to the channel. In fact, this episode is going out a day early. Not because I want to get Spencer out of the way early in the week so I don't want him dragging around and hanging around and making my life miserable, but because I have other things to do. But notwithstanding that, we're a day early going out, and so look out for it on Tuesdays rather than Wednesdays. Spencer, interesting week. Obviously at the centre of it, how are you? Great, fantastic. At the centre of it...
Thanks for asking.
is the Joyce defeat.
Yeah.
And all that went with it. Do you think we're guilty, us in the media, of building Joyce up to a point where there was an inevitability about him coming up short? Maybe not just in this fight, but in other fights.
No, I don't
clearly no one expected this outcome.
No one expected this outcome. Listen, it's not like you thought, wow, like you didn't see, like we knew how dangerous his opponent was. Yep. We knew how dangerous Zhang was. You know, we knew he was heavy-handed, southpaw. We saw what he'd done to Hrgovic. You only go off the last performances. So we were building Joyce up to, and I said in last week's show, yep, do you know what? I think if he gets the right route and the right opportunity comes, he can win a world title. You go off the last performance. What he'd done to Joseph Parker was sensational. It was a fight that was going in. I thought actually Parker would win that. I tipped Parker to win that. I thought his experience, his durability, and his whole game really would win that fight. Joyce proved me wrong yet again, and I thought, you know what, this kid has the ability to win a world title. What we got on Saturday night was tactically got everything wrong. We'll go into it, Simon, and break it all down. But I mean, coming in the weight that he come in at, you could see that his punch resistance had clearly gone. Like, so Joyce's main assets are his strength, his durability, and his engine.
Correct. Yeah.
He boxed Joseph Parker. I'm going to use that as an example. It's, for me, one of his career best performances. He boxed Parker at 19 stone 3. He come in here at 18 stone 2. And that was the wrong weight. You could see that he was too small. So, like, Zhang was 19 stone 12. He couldn't push Zhang back. He tried that. So, tactically, we know his boxing IQ is not that great. He is all about work rate. He's a workhorse. He takes one to give two, and he looks to wear his opponent down. And that's where we thought he would be with Zhang. We thought if he got through those early rounds, he would gradually wear Zhang down and he'd take him out, possibly for a late stoppage, or wide points victory. And I still stand by that if he tactically got it right. I just think he got it wrong, Simon.
I mean, okay, tactically, you're including in the tactics the size that he came in at, right?
Was,
so someone has said to him that it's better for him to be slightly lighter so he can move a little bit more.
Crazy.
For some reason or another, because it makes no sense. Because Joseph Parker, I mean, we've seen Joe ship punishment. We've seen Carlos Takam whack him.
Yeah.
We've seen Christian Hammer hit him. We've seen Joseph Parker hit him with everything.
Yeah.
But this is probably, and I don't know if you want to dispute this, probably the heaviest handed fighter he's been in with.
Yeah.
And to go in there a stone and a bit lighter against a fighter that's nearly 20 stone that we know can hit.
Yeah.
And we all knew that because the guy comes in with the name Big Bang. The secret, it wasn't a secret, was it?
No.
And so for Joe to have come in there, I saw George Warren, and the first thing when I saw Joe take his robe off, I looked at George and went, I saw him at the weigh-in, but it's only when you see him in the flesh, I thought, wow, he looks small in comparison to Zhang. It still didn't fill me with worry. The first round surprised me. Joe starts notoriously slowly, and it was, for the first 2 minutes, no one wanted to throw anything, did they?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Zhang finds his range, and it looked like Joe was going to get put on the seat of his pants in the first round.
Yeah.
And I saw Daniel Dubois hit him hard. You know, we saw Carlos Takam, as I said, hit him hard. But no one wobbled him the way Zhang wobbled him. And you're going to attribute that, the bulk of that, down to the weight loss and the lack of resistance as a result of it.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, him coming out in as light as he did, like, he looked fantastic.
He did.
But you could tell, like you said, I'll go back to that first round as well with Zhang. When he come out, they're both moving around, and Zhang hit him with that left hand through the middle, out that southpaw stance. And you saw Joe rock to his boots, and I went, I know that's from making that weight, that extra weight where it's not that he's made weight, but where he's come in too small and the punch resistance wasn't there with that bigger guy. Like Joe would have soaked that up normally and he would have just sort of soldiered on. And when he tried tactically, because the second round was a terrible round for Joe Joyce as well, looked like he was all over the place. He was hurt badly and that was sort of the beginning of the end. But then when Joe in the third and fourth round tried to turn it around, he tried to bite on his gum shield, tried to push forward, making that weight for me, I think made him more sluggish. He looked slower. He looked.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
because
he
looked remarkably slower. I mean, not only did he look smaller than Zhang, he looked remarkably slower than he did, which surprised me because surely if you're going to lose on one side, you're going to gain on another. And are we in danger? And it's not because everyone's going beat, now reversing back now. I didn't think Joe Joyce was going to win a world title. I thought Joe Joyce was worthy of a shot at a world title.
Yeah.
And when we spoke about it last week, you sort of goldfished on who he was going to win a world title against. You made the claim that he would win a world title, and I said, well, who's he going to beat then?
Yeah.
And that's where the conversation ran dry.
Sure.
Because I can't make a case for Joe to beat Tyson Fury. I think Tyson Fury would box his ears off. I think Usyk would do the same. But we all felt that Joe would make them work very hard because of the nature of the two main attributes, which you've alluded to. Right? One is the resolution of his chin, and the other is the engine.
Yeah.
Right. And eventually, with what we saw on Saturday, we all know that Joe Joyce is not a brilliant boxer. We know that Joe Joyce has this remarkable two component parts that I've just alluded to.
Yeah.
You hit him on a chin, he keeps on coming forward, and he keeps on going and keeps on going. And probably on Saturday, if he hadn't have kept on getting poked in the face by Zhang and closing up of his eye in the same way that he did to Daniel Dubois, it's like almost like karma coming back round and visiting him. He probably would have gone on and possibly have got Zhang out of there later on in the fight or got a points victory. Although saying that, there's a utopian view there. There was nothing that we saw in the first 6 rounds that alludes to that, besides the fact that we've got this belief that Joe can take a whack, and take a whack, and take a whack, and take a whack, take a whack, and eventually will find himself on top of the opponent.
What I noticed very early on with Zhilei Zhang was that he started becoming very comfortable. He started growing in confidence, actually, because tactically he had it right. He was waiting for Joe to come in. He was leading off with that left hand. He was throwing those big right hooks over the top as well, and he was hurting Joe. And then when Joe was coming back at him, he was thinking, I thought he was stronger than that. So now all of a sudden he's smiling and he's doing... I saw that he was completely in his comfort zone. And I go, from about the third round, I was like, this is only a matter of time because Zhang, you could see, was growing in stature, growing in confidence. And Joe Joyce was in fifth gear. He was working as hard. He was working like working like a horse.
Trojan,
but he actually wasn't getting anywhere. He was not making any impact at all. It was a big problem. So, and like I say, I just go... We go on performances, and I go, he looked great, but I just think that his weight was too small. That was not where his weight is best at. Like if I use Anthony Joshua as an example, Anthony Joshua, when he comes in at anywhere between 17 stone 2 and 17 stone 4 is when he's most explosive because he's quite athletic and he likes to use his explosive power and so that works for him. When he comes in at like say 17 6, 17 8, 17 9, he's slow and sluggish, and that works against him.
When you were evaluating it after the fights, can you see any reason? I don't think Zhang did anything particularly spectacular. I think he exploited the well-established weeknesses that Joe Joyce has, which is he's easy to hit. Right? And and obviously you were there, and you were with Adam Cattrall and Gareth Davis. You would have had a view about what you saw in front of you and what the strategy was to go into this fight lighter than he went in before, and to see what they would have seen in Zhilei Zhang before the fight, to be able to produce that sort of performance. Can you make any sense of the strategy that was deployed? Because the strategy wasn't a strategy of a particular style of way in fighting, because he fights the same way, Joe.
Sure.
Because you can't teach an old dog new tricks, can you?
No, I'm glad you asked me that question, actually, because like normally if a fighter's coming in lighter, a heavyweight, the strategy is because they want to use a lot more movement and they want to use their speed and they want to be more explosive. Well, Joe Joyce doesn't have any of them. Joe Joyce doesn't have any movement anyway. His hand speed's not quick anyway. So Joe Joyce's main assets are his strength and his durability and the way that he pushes forward, hence coming in heavier. And that's what he should have done against the bigger guy. So I think tactically the team got it wrong. I think
but it's blind, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Simon. And I'm still, and I can't work it out. And I'm still trying to work it out. I'm going, why the would they even suggest coming in at 18 stone when they've got a guy who, like Zhilei Zhang the tactics were easy for him. He's going, well, I know Joe Joyce is going to come at me. I'm just going to stand there, and when he comes, because he comes in quite square, I'm going to pop the left hand through the middle, throw the right hook over the top, out of that southpaw stance. And that's exactly what he'd done. And I think that Zhilei Zhang must have been thinking, this is like Christmas come at once. I can't believe that he's fallen into the trap. It was not even a hard thing to work out. It was like, that was the obvious thing. Like, you'd go, right, if you was not even trying to work out tactics, you'd go, right, I got someone boxing Joe Joyce. I go, let him come to you, like, throw the hook over the top, throw the left hands through the middle, simple. But Joe's going to be smarter than that. All of a sudden, Joe comes in lighter weight, and you think, what's the game plan there? What is he going to plan to do? But he's still done the same tactics that he would normally do, but only he was lighter. So I'm trying to work out.
Because we were all guilty of it, weren't we? I mean, I sat here and said, I think this will end in 6 rounds. I didn't realise it will end in 6 rounds in favour of Zhang.
Yeah.
And you thought that he would go further down the stretch, but Joe wouldn't see the 12th round, and Joe would take him out in the championship rounds. But neither one of those manifested themselves. I mean, you look at, again, Adam Morley, who I think is a great guy and is his promoter, his manager, and looks after him. Do you get the sense that Joe was given? Because I suppose I'm going into territory of saying, has Joe started to read his own script and believe his own hype?
Great.
And believe about the reality of what he's being told is no one can knock him out. He's got a chin like something out of X-Men. You know, he's not going to get knocked out, and he can take whatever shots everyone, because everyone knows that Joe isn't going to outbox anybody.
Well, that's what he was referencing all week, Simon, that he was saying, you know, everyone's got a plan until they get hit in the face, then what happens? And he was doing all that stuff, and he was going, I don't know if he fell into the trap of believing the hype around this, I can't be hurt.
Is this a case, Spence, of styles and making fights, that the idea that we have in our head that he gives Fury trouble because of his size and engine. Yeah. He gives others trouble. I mean, I got some ribbing from people, Michael Jarman, over the weekend about anthonyjoshua, and he gives anthonyjoshua a raft of problems. Wouldn't that be funny? A person whose chin you can't miss with someone that doesn't want to throw a punch to hit him in the first place.
Everyone's very quick to judge, aren't they? Like, on these performances, like, you go right there, like Joe Joyce there, I'm going to be honest, was terrible in that performance, because I just think he looked, I know he's not particularly fast anyway, but he looked even more sluggish. He looked weak. He did it like physically he looked great, but his performance was terrible. And I put the whole of it down to make it cutting the weight too much.
Where does he go? Where does he go from here now? I mean, you know, there is a rematch, and it's Queensberry have got a situation now where they've got another fox in the hen house. You've got Zhang in the mandatory position for the WBO now, so they've got another fighter in the mix of it. They can make this fight possibly the rematch in Macau or somewhere like that. Yeah. So it's, without wanting to sound like it's Machiavellian on their part, it's clever business, because they've got the right to deal with Zhang again, whether that's potentially with Joe Joyce or with someone else. So it's a clever bit of business there. Zhang's in the mix of it, but more importantly for us, where do we see Joe Joyce going? Because clearly, in my view, Dillian Whyte was there to call out Joe Joyce after the fight.
I'm glad
that's why he was there.
And I still like that fight.
Me too.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because for me, I'd go, right, listen, I wouldn't go into the immediate rematch there with Zhilei Zhang, because I think that won't suit him going straight back into that one. He needs a confidence rebuilder, really. And I know a lot of people have been giving a stick online saying, well, what do you mean? He's 37 years of age. You know, how's he going to rebuild? He hasn't got the time to rebuild. Of course he's got time to rebuild. He's got to go in there. And I think that the Dillian Whyte fight would be great. And then put him back in with maybe Zhilei Zhang at a higher weight. Don't cut the weight like you did. Use your weight to your advantage and your strength, and try and take him in the backstretch and grind him out. That's where he needed to be. So I think that, Dillian Whyte would be a great step. Then go in with Zhang again. Then you're back in the mix again.
What do you make of his...
But where does Zhang go from here? That's the interesting thing.
Well, he's contracted to a rematch with Joe Joyce, isn't he? It's whether Joe Joyce wants to step away from that and release him, and where does he go? Absolutely. Does he fight Dillian Whyte? Does Dillian Whyte want to take that particular challenge on?
What route would you take with him?
With Zhang?
No, with Joe Joyce. What route would you take with Joyce?
Dillian Whyte.
Dillian Whyte.
Yeah.
And what about Zhang?
Well, if you're asking me to think about Joyce, I wouldn't be thinking about Zhang. I'd be thinking about Joyce. Good. I mean, Zhang is... You
wouldn't go into the immediate rematch?
Look, there's a balance to be had between righting the wrongs. Joe Joyce, I don't think... The way he reacted after the fight was... And I think that's a part of his character. It's the way he operates as a person. It's the level that he's on cerebrally, where it doesn't seem to get a visceral reaction from him. He was actually saying, when his mum was more emotional about him, his mum turning around and saying, how comes Daniel Dubois doesn't get the people looking at his eye till the 10th round? He goes, not now, mum.
Yeah.
You know,
Didn't you think that was great, by the way?
I thought,
how refreshing was that?
It was.
Because he sneakily took a look in at his mum. I'll just let you two have a moment together. He took a sneaky look at you when Ismail Salas told you to bring it on in the 5th or 6th round, when he was throwing punches, for you to come back even harder, and he sat back and he just sneakily attacked your eye for that last kind of 5 or 6 minutes of the fight. And then as Howard Foster and the doctor decided, you can't fight one-eyed in this sport.
Yeah, it's an eye for an eye again. Now I've got my eye done.
Because Daniel Dubois could fight for 10 rounds, no one looked at his eye.
No, Mum.
Okay.
Marvel's here and emotional, your mum. You're bound to be.
In one respect, it showed the fragility and the naivety of certain positions, but also it showed, dare I say it, a sort of lack of professionalism around the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you've just got beat in a big fight. Joe seemed to give very little emotion towards it, and when they asked him about
the
rematch, he pretty much said, no.
Yeah, and that's
an honest reaction. If you want an honest reaction, you got one there.
And that's why I made that decision straight away to go, look, he doesn't need to go back into that immediate rematch, because I don't think he actually is ready for it, because mentally he didn't sound like he wanted it. You know, I've seen fighters in the past when they go, no, I want it again. I got it wrong. You know, whether it was the weight, whether it was whatever, I felt sluggish. I got it wrong. I need the immediate rematch. Joe's body language, what he was saying, didn't tell me that. So I thought, you know what? I'll go down that Dillian Whyte route and then try and rebuild from there. I think,
despite the fact, Dillian Whyte came off the back of that loss to Povetkin, didn't he? Came back and avenged that Povetkin loss. Then went in and was completely and utterly outclassed by Tyson Fury. And we'll get on to this situation in Saudi in a minute, and Dillian thinking he's going to throw his hat into the ring as one of the elite fighters that should fight in that space. And I'm sorry, Dillian, I've got news for you. You had your moment. You got into a ring with Tyson Fury and you weren't even in the same zip code, let alone class. But I do think there's a benefit in Joe Joyce fighting Dillian Whyte, because on paper that looks like a good fight. I mean, no one was impressed with Dillian Whyte against Jermaine Franklin. Yeah, clearly Anthony Joshua, for whatever reason, whether he's worried about himself or whether he sees a big cash cow in Saudi at the end of the year, and we'll talk about that in a second, isn't going to fight. So Dillian Whyte has to have a fight. And to me, it looks like a great gatekeeper for one another, because if Dillian Whyte were to beat Joe Joyce, people would say, okay, he came off the back of a defeat against Zhang, but he was on the redemption trail and got beat again by Dillian Whyte. So Dillian Whyte's now in the groove again. And Joe Joyce is now a thing of the past because he's lost 2 in a row. If Joe Joyce gets back in the ring and beats Dillian Whyte, the Dillian Whyte name will reverberate. He's fought for a world title. People still rank him inside the top 3 in most of the divisions, in most of the belt classes, or certainly inside the top 5 in most of the belt classes. So with that in mind, I think it's a sellable fight.
I think it's a
bankable fight.
Really, it's both of them. The winner comes out good for both of them. I think
Well, then the question then abounds, isn't it? The next question off that, if that is a fight that can be seen to be made, and I think they'd quite like it. Who would win that fight? You've got to go. You've got Joe Joyce standing winning a world title. We've made a case in this conversation for styles and fights and wrong tactics, and the wrong tactics being about size, because there's no other tactic in Joe Joyce's mind besides knocking the world out of his chin.
I would go with Joe Joyce in that fight. I'd go Joe Joyce to win that one. Just because I think that his sheer size would just wear Dillian down. But it's one of those ones. The reason why that is an attractive fight is because Dillian's very, very heavy-handed, especially with that left hook. If he hits you, you stay hit, and he's got a great chance of doing that. So it's one of those fights that, again,
who hits heavier, Dillian Whyte or Joseph Parker?
Oh, Dillian Whyte,
definitely.
Yeah, right. Dillian Whyte, yeah. Dillian Whyte's very heavy-handed,
but he's not as heavy-handed as Zhang, is he?
No, he's probably not as heavy-handed as Zhang. He's not far off, to be fair. With that left hook, Do you remember, who was it, Lucas Brown? Do you remember when he knocked out Lucas Brown, that left hook? He's got incredible power, Dillian, so you'd have to give him a shot. It's a heavyweight. We've seen what happens. We saw what happened on Saturday night. You've got to give him a shot. With someone like Joe Joyce, he's going to get hit. And what we saw there on Saturday night was that actually he can get hurt.
Yeah, that's the surprise. That was the thing. Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's inevitability about it. And not to rehash the argument debate we've already had. if you keep on offering your chin up to people,
Yeah.
it's one thing taking a shot of Carlos Takam, who's a fighter that's not on the way up anymore. It's another thing taking again some shots off Christian Hammer. It's another thing taking him off Joseph Parker, former world title holder.
Yeah.
But this 19 and this 20 stone beast that went in there, you know, was hitting him hard. And what we saw was that you hit him hard, he gets hurt like everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, you wonder what Deontay Wilder would do, because Deontay Wilder hits the hardest.
Yeah.
Same thing would happen there, because there is no technical value to Joe Joyce, is there?
When they lose that air of invincibility, it gives their opponents a lot of, do you know what I mean? A lot of
Energy.
strength and a lot of energy. And I think that's, you know, what Dillian Whyte will have now going into there, thinking, right, if I just get close enough and land one of my big shots. I mean, who do you think wins that fight? Dillian Whyte and Joe Parker? Joe Joyce, sorry.
I think it's difficult to call. I think that because of Joe Joyce's strength and resilience, and because I don't put Dillian in the same space as other fighters, I was so disappointed with Dillian in the Tyson Fury fight. I was disappointed in him from the moment he walked into the fact he didn't want to get involved in the promotion of it, through to this press conference appearance when I thought to myself, and I think I said to you, he doesn't think he can win. I would probably not, because, and it's difficult because you find yourself liking Joe Joyce, right? But you've got to call it for what it was. It was an inept performance on Saturday. It has diminished him. It's dispelled myths about him that he can take shots from whoever wants to throw them.
Yeah.
We knew that he was technically inadequate. We've seen that being shown up, and we've seen that he can be hurt. So I really think that Whyte versus Joyce would be a pick'em. I think it could be a pick'em fight.
Yeah.
And I think that it would be a defining fight for Joe Joyce, because if he were to lose two on a row against Zhang and Dillian Whyte, I think he should avoid Zhang.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a fight he needs to take. I think he needs to counsel himself to accept that loss, and maybe there'll be a chance to avenge it at a later stage. The only question that you have to ask yourself is, by not taking that fight against Zhang, where does he put himself in the mandatories? Because we know that Usyk is going to fight potentially Daniel Dubois to be able to fulfill his WBA. If the Saudi rumours that have been bouncing around that I vocalised last week become prevalent, then the argument that he's got to fight Hrgovic next and the IBF becomes less relevant, and either people are going to step aside, or there's going to be a deal done, or belts are going to be dropped, or something's going to happen in that space. But you've got to find yourself, if Joe isn't going to fight himself back into a mandatory position, how is he going to get to where he needs to get to?
Where you've got Hrgovic, who's the IBF mandatory, and then you've got the WBO now, which is Zhilei Zhang. And you've got the WBA, which is Daniel
that's my
Dubois.
point. So Joe's now
now he's put himself in that space, of like, where does he go? That's why I think the Dillian Whyte fight is a great fight. Keeps him still right up there in the rankings. And we've got to see what happens with these titles. You know, will they fragment them? Will they sort of like, the fighters can't fulfill their obligations to do the mandatories? Will they relinquish titles? Will the titles become vacant? Because that's what can happen. You know, they've been chasing this undisputed the whole time, and you can fill us in a little bit more about this whole Saudi situation. But if that undisputed fight doesn't happen, them titles are going to stop, because the fighters won't be able to fulfill their mandatories. So that gives other fighters opportunity.
For Usyk, the obligation is WBA, IBF, and WBO.
Yeah.
So in people's minds, and I think Adam Morley's minds for Joe, we can still reclaim this mandatory position by the time that we have to get an opportunity for a shot.
Sure.
But that means they're going to have to fight Zhilei Zhang again.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the right move for Joe. I think
agree.
Perhaps he should avoid that like the plague. But listen, anyway, I think we've done that to death now. Disappointed. I'm disappointed because I spent some time in the auditorium with a group of Joe Joyce's friends who were very excited that he was getting attention and castigating us because you're a coward and didn't tell his mother that the reasons why we didn't mention him was because he didn't turn up.
Did you like that? Did you see the interview? Did you see the interview?
Yeah, I saw the interview.
She come up to me, she was steaming. She was like, you know, you don't give my son the recognition he deserves.
We didn't mention your son because he was getting his hair braided and couldn't make the interview. Yeah. You didn't say that, though, did you?
No, I didn't.
You turned around and said, it's Simon's fault.
Listen, I totally swallowed it and said, listen, I said, look, I wanted to mention it. It's Simon Jordan's fault.
Yeah. I saw you. Yeah. Mustn't use the word coward, it offends people. Yeah, like Eddie Hearn racing over that.
Wait, do you know what, though? That still never went down well. Do you know what she said to me? Do you know what the answer was to that? Well, I like Simon. What about me?
Yes. Anyway, let's move on to the discussion that we had last week. That obviously annoyed Joe's mum about the mentioning of the potential opportunity in Saudi. That's certainly in the offing. Whether it can be achieved is a different matter, but it's certainly an appetite that the Saudis have for it, and whether they can deliver it. But I listened to Dillian Whyte.
Is that a conversation that's being had, by the way?
Oh, I think it's undoubtedly a conversation that the Saudis are having.
Yeah.
Now, the difficulty that you'll have in making this fight is not the quantum of money that can be put up, but is the difficulty of dealing with the broadcasters. Because if you've seen the Anthony Joshua situation with DAZN and what there is there from that point of view, if you're the Saudis, you can find the money, you can put the money up, and clearly there is an ambition to do so. Clearly, Prince Khalid has ambitions for these sort of things, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia certainly has the money to do it.
When they bidded for the Anthony Joshua Alexander Usyk 2 fight, Anthony Joshua was with DAZN then, but the Saudis bought the fight, obviously, so they had the TV rights and they actually gave it to Sky TV. I mean, is that a situation that could still happen if they're buying?
If you're gonna put these fighters on this bill, which is, I'm pretty clear, is the ambition, you're going to have deals in place with a variety of different broadcasters, because all these fighters, you've got BT in the mix, you've got DAZN in the mix, you might even have ESPN in the mix for one of the other fighters if we talk about other deals that are available, and it depends upon what kind of media buyouts you want to do with these broadcasters. I don't think the quantum of cash being paid to the fighters is the challenge. I think the broadcast and output deals will become the challenging the opportunity that they have to overcome. Do I think it's real? Yeah, I do think it's real. I didn't just say it because I picked it out of my backside. I heard it from two very different parts of two very big camps, and it's on the offing. It's no coincidence that Anthony Joshua has decided he's not going to fight again until December. These aren't coincidences. These are because there was a dynamic and an opportunity to do precisely that, and it will change the landscape. And it will create this phenomenal scenario of fights on the same card with an outcome on a different card of the two winners of these so-called semi-finals. Right. Would produce an outcome, and the money's there, no doubt about it. And it's no doubt that the Saudis want to do this, but it's whether they can deliver the fighters to the table, not from a financial point of view, but just simply from the broadcast output point of view. And then you move into the territory of Dillian and what he was saying, expanding it. And I don't think Dillian's got the memo that you're not at that table anymore.
We know it's rumour at the moment. Deontay Wilder against Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk, Tyson Fury. Surely, if they're doing that, they should have an 8-man tournament.
It's going to be an 8-man tournament that include me. You know, an 8-man tournament include me and Joyce. Yeah. Me, Joyce, and who else? Maybe
Flip Hergovich, Zhang, Jared Anderson.
Probably Parker. Them guys, Jared Anderson haven't done anything yet. Probably Parker, Joyce. Jared Anderson haven't fought no one yet. Jared Anderson haven't fought a guy with a winning record yet. Who was he fought with a winning record, you know? An 8-man tournament, that would be amazing. That would revolutionize boxing, you know, and that would force everyone to fight everyone. You know, you understand? And then it would be worthwhile doing because, okay, you might lose here, but you still got a chance. You understand? Or someone might get injured and you can come back in and end up winning the whole thing, you know what I mean? And that's everywhere boxing is all about, drama and excitement, you know what I mean? And that's what's lacking in the division.
And it might be nice for you to equate your name and run around putting yourself at the ringside of fights like Anthony Joshua and Jermaine Franklin, because pick me. Well, or do the same to Joyce. Yeah. And again, pick me. But if it comes down to an elite shootout, you're not there. And there's no way that this is going to be an 8-fighter tournament. And there's no way it all happens on the same evening, Dillian. Yeah. I don't quite understand what he was saying on Saturday night.
This is where I'm at with it. I think if they do this competition, which I think should be a 4-man competition, semi-final and final, the only reason being, I think it has to be over the 12-round distance. Can't be over a 6-round distance.
No, of course not.
Otherwise, it's like, because fights are, fights are won and lost in the penultimate rounds.
These are heavyweight blue chip fighters that are fighting in Saudi Arabia or potentially fighting in Saudi Arabia because the money's there and the spectacle and opportunities there. It doesn't get extrapolated up to 8 fighters. It makes no sense. You're not going to get that many fights on the card. You're not fighting more than one fight in an evening. So I'm not entirely sure what Dillian was talking about on Saturday evening about why he thinks he should be in the mix, because he isn't good enough to be in the mix. The 4 elite fighters, whether we like it or we don't like it, and one of them might be there because of previous achievements and also the economic value they have to bring, which is the least compelling of all the arguments are probably Fury, I'm talking about Joshua and Wilder, but certainly Joshua, to me, is the most debatable of the four, but Wilder, Fury, and Usyk are elite heavyweights right now. Well, and Joshua was a former elite heavyweight that's trying to regain his poise, just coming off the back of a win. And everyone knows brings the truckloads of cash to the table.
But that's the point, that he's coming off the back of that win, and you can't deny with Anthony Joshua that he is an elite heavyweight. He is what he is. You have to put him in one of the top four. If you're doing a tournament with four of the best fighters looking for the best fighter of our modern era, heavyweight, you have to throw Joshua in the mix.
Well, you do and you don't, because ultimately you do, because most people will accept that Joshua's contribution to boxing over the last 10 years has, like the analogy of, all boats rise in a high tide. So the economic values, and I had a conversation with Tony Bellew about fighting in small halls and how Anthony Joshua has driven everyone up to a different level. But he's also got this relationship in Saudi, had fights over there, and got relationships going over there. Now, does that entitle him to be inside the top four heavyweights in the world based upon the fact that he's lost 3 of his last 5 fights? In some arguments, you'd say no. In other arguments, you'd say yes. But if you're going to say that Joshua should be excluded, let's just play devil's advocate just for a second. If we were to exclude Anthony Joshua and say we can make a case for Wilder, albeit Wilder's lost 2 of his last 4 fights, right? We can make a case for Wilder. We can certainly clear the decks for Fury and Usyk. But if we were arguing about Joshua not being in there, who would we argue to be put in there in his place?
Tell me, that's my point. I wouldn't be having that argument. I think that that they are the top 4 for me. And that, I don't think there is an argument there.
And that, to me, then, if you're making that argument about Dillian White, then you'd be bringing in Hrgovic into the mix now. You'd be bringing Joyce into the mix.
You couldn't put Dillian White over Hrgovic right now, anyway. No. That would be absolutely insane.
So the commercial sensitivities that Dillian wants to shout out about being in an 8-man tournament is silly, because it's not going to happen. He doesn't have the credentials to be there, and the scale of the events wouldn't manifest itself to be at that level of competition. People have to accept that most likely, in most people's minds, and that is the broadcasters and the fight fans, the 4 elite heavyweights that would feature in this format would be Joshua, would be Fury, would be Usyk, and fortunately, I think, for him, would be Wilder too, because Wilder brings the heat with him.
Absolutely.
And the expectation of what he can do in the ring, and obviously he's on the comeback trail, and the money comes with him as well.
He's come off that good win against Helenius, so he's in the gym all the time. He's ready. Look, I think that's a no-brainer. If we have that, and that situation, this situation does happen, we get the semi-finals, obviously, one night. When do we get the final?
Well, that's to be determined. I mean, you can't have it any time soon, because you've got heavyweight boxing and people being knocked out. So I would suspect that if they're going to do precisely what they say, I know the appetite's there. I know this is I know this isn't media hype. I know that this is legitimate direction from the Saudis and legitimate financial resources deployed behind it. The challenge is, until they put contracts on the table, George Warren or Eddie Hearn or whoever else is representing other fighters, whether it's Usyk's representation, don't have much to go on besides the ambition and the idea. And of course, when you've got the decision-making process to buy out the media rights from whether it's DAZN or whether it's Sky or whether there's a deal to be done with those guys that incorporates everybody in the mix, those are the complicated parts that will take some time to pull together. But it's a fascinating concept and it's a fascinating opportunity. Do I think it will happen? I think there's a 50-50 chance. Right. I think the money will be there. I think the fighters can get there. I do think, I keep saying it, that the problem might well be the broadcasters. But where there's a will, there'll be a way. Now, to go to your original question, I would imagine if you're fighting in December, you'd reconvene again in April.
Yeah, springtime.
You'd reconvene again in April.
Yeah.
But it would be the biggest boxing event and generate global eyes on the prize, because you're covering the 4 corners of the globe. You've got an American fighter in there. You've got a Ukrainian fighter in there. You've got 2 British fighters in there that command and demand audiences. One of them that's already crossed over to America and has appeal in America in Fury, and one of them that's a darling of the media in Anthony Joshua. Yeah. It's a phenomenal concept. And I, for one, sincerely hope that the Saudis put their money where their mouths are, because it's great that they're there in some respects, not so great in another. Some people would argue, like Gareth Davis, that it's great that these Middle Eastern countries are there because they make fights happen. On the other side of the argument, they also make fights not happen, because without their presence at the table, they've poisoned the well economically,
Get it.
And then nobody wants to fight anything else other than Saudi money.
Yeah.
Because everything else is underpaid. So they have a responsibility to deliver outcomes, and it's up to the boxing fraternity and the promoters to make them hold them to account and say, right, you want to do this? Okay, here's the barriers to entry. Tell us how you're going to overcome them. Fascinating.
Brilliant.
Right, that's it for episode 21 of Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. Don't forget to like the videos, subscribe to the channel, and me and him will see you next week.